bizarre Law and Order 2020 campaign thing to try to scare the devil out of the American people. And what's happened is, it has this, look, Mike, when the president decided he had to walk across from the White House to a group of peaceful demonstrators to an Episcopal church to hold a Bible upside down, which I don't know how often he reads, and he used the military to do that. Did you ever think you'd see a chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff apologizing to the nation for participating in that? Did you ever think you'd see 4 former chiefs of staff talk about how everything is about dividing the country? That wasn't about being able to walk across and hold up the Bible. That wasn't about the church burning or being burned. It was about, as his own people said, his own commander, it was about dividing the country, preying on it. When you have a president who, in almost the same day, the state of Mississippi takes the Confederate flag off of their flag, and he's defending the Confederate flag, and it's just a matter of heritage, and why is it still being flown or something to that effect at NASCAR, and why things are down. This is about division. This is about trying to split the country. And so far, thank God, the American people aren't having any of it. Over 70% of the people in the country thinking the protesters that do you ever think you'd see 70% of the people saying Black Lives Matter? Because they see what happens. And they're not buying onto this racial division. That's what he's done from the very beginning. As you've heard me say, coming down an escalator today, he announced he's going to get rid of those Mexican rapists and judges. I mean, this is... So, Mike, I don't think you need to do that, but I think we do need to hold those who violate the law accountable. You should never let what's done in a march for equal rights overcome what the reason for the march is. And that's what these folks are doing. And they should be found, arrested, and tried.
And sir, if I can, as you finished the rollout of your economic plan, during the course of the primaries, you were critical of some of your Democratic opponents for putting forward plans that you thought were too expensive and not realistic in terms of getting passed. I wonder if you're now proposing nearly $3 trillion as part of this, in spending as part of this economic plan. Can you describe your evolution in terms of what you view as achievable if you're elected and sworn in as president?
I think there's a big difference between saying, figuratively speaking, no one can be a millionaire, it's a bad thing, saying that we are going to provide a medical plan that costs $30 trillion or $32 trillion and being able to think you can get it passed. And being able to pass in this environment legislation that the circumstances have demonstrated is needed to solve real problems. For example, the idea that we can continue to be in a circumstance where we reward companies for government contractors for going overseas to make their products, that we can continue to provide tax breaks for that effort. When we find we come up short with everything from reagents or nasal swabs to not being able to provide for the kinds of steel we need to do certain things in American ships and the like, is totally different than that. What we're talking about is using federal dollars that have already been appropriated to focus them on building things that make us and increase our independence, so we don't have to rely on anyone else for whether it's cybersecurity and cyber information, or whether or not it is steel to make the banisters on our destroyers. We, in fact, should be able to do that, those things that are necessary, and we have the capacity to do at home, do them at home. It's not industrial planning. It's the things that only the United States government can do. For example, the same thing with regard to my whole plan relative to the environment. We, in fact, are the only outfit. Companies aren't going to come along and go spend $1 trillion on infrastructure, rebuild highways, bridges that are causing people to die when they collapse and are still unsafe, making sure ports are accessible and ships can get in and out and unload their cargo. It's that. The government does that. And when the government does that, the government should be, in fact, insisting that, using that taxpayer dollar, we are buying the product from an American manufacturer made in America, employing American workers, getting a decent wage. And that's not industrial policy. It's the things the government does anyway. Just like you've heard me say before. The President of the United States, and I'm President, I'm going to inherit the largest auto and truck fleet in the world, owned by the taxpayers. Well, what do you think we should do? Well, I think what we should be doing is making sure we end up owning the electrical vehicle market. So what I'm going to do is move to make sure all those vehicles become carbon neutral. Building 550,000 charging stations up and down federally built highways and controlled highways. Generating the kind of growth, union wages that can provide good jobs for people and bring everybody along. So it is very different than saying we're going to go out and find another $38 trillion and get that passed in a Congress where you didn't have the support to get it. I predict you'll find that I get significant support, particularly if I think is going to happen. I think we're going to take back the United States Senate. And again, we're just spending the dollars that are already appropriated in many cases and how we spend them.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, Ed O'Keefe, CBS.
Thank you, sir. Take this now. You alluded to this in your remarks, and I bring it up because polling is bearing this out a little bit. But are you running against President Trump or for President and for Joe Biden? In other words, you alluded to this, but a lot of voters seem to think or are saying that their support hinges on the fact that you're not the president. So why perhaps should they be voting for you and not just against the president?
That's why I'm laying out these detailed plans. Look, I'm running because Trump is the president. And I think our democracy is at stake for real. And what seems to be the case is many Americans, those who don't like me and those who do, view me as the antithesis of Trump. And I believe that I am. And when I announced, I said I was running because I thought it was essential to restore basic decency, the soul of America. But I really meant it. It wasn't, remember I got criticized early on for saying that. Now everybody's talking about the soul of America, decency, honor, respect. The second reason I said I was running is because even back when people were talking about how well the economy was moving, I thought the middle class was still getting crushed. And working class folks were hurting badly. All this talk about how happy they were. I didn't see any numbers showing they were so happy because people were getting paid badly. Corporate America was overreaching in terms of who they felt they had an obligation to deal with at all. And thirdly, the thing I got most criticized for, and understandably, was I said we have to unite America. And they said, well, that's just a pipe dream. You used to be able to do that, Joe, but everything's changed. Well, if we can't unite America, we're gone. We're dead. Democracy's dead. It requires consensus. That's not hyperbole. It requires consensus. And that's why I used to be sometimes critical when people stand in the debate, say, I'm going to by executive order do the following. Well, that's Trump. He doesn't have the authority to do half of what he's doing by executive order. That is not democracy. And so what I hope, the good news, I think, is the bad news based on all the million polls that have been done by your network and everybody else. Is the good news is the bad news. People know me. They know me warts and all. And the reason why I'm running is because I think I have two qualities at this moment that aren't always the most relevant qualities needed in a president. It changes. Every election is different. One is that I know a fair amount about American foreign policy, and I have relations all over the world. And those who don't like me respect me, and those who do like me respect me. I know how to get things done internationally. Doesn't mean I can solve every problem, but I understand the national security and intelligence issues. That's what I've done my whole life. Trump has no notion of it. None. Think of how he talks about Putin. My God. And he talks to him privately and says he's not going to tell you whether he raised the fact that Putin's paying the Taliban. Number one. Number two, I have been relatively good at bringing people together in the United States Congress and politically. It's going to be a lot harder. Things have changed. A lot harder. But depending on the outcome of the election, in terms of the Senate and House races, it could become very much within reach. Because, and I'll say it again, I've never questioned anybody's motive. I've never lied to a political opponent and misled them. Even when I was in the Senate and I'd say, I need your vote on this, but I got to tell you, you vote for it, this part of your constituents is going to be mad at you. I've never misled anybody. I don't expect anybody to voluntarily agree to be in the second editions of Profiles in Courage. I try to recognize the limits of where they can go and still find a principled compromise. And so there are the two things that I think we very badly need now. And lastly, I think that notwithstanding the fact, I think I have laid out the most detailed plans on the economy and on issues relating to healthcare and the rest of any president in modern history. I mean, it's awful detail. If I'm elected and this passes, I'm going to be good to go down as one of the most progressive presidents in American history. But none of the things I'm talking about are inconsistent with a free market. They're not inconsistent with capitalism, but they require certain safeguards. Just like, that old thing, it took a capitalist to save capitalism. Well, I think there's a lot that we can get done and will get done. And that's why, last thing I'll say, remember I was criticized by saying I'm going to campaign in states for senators and House members were states that I'm not likely to be able to win. Because what everything shows, and you know this inside out and backwards, all of you do, that when the National Party doesn't invest in areas where there's a tight race, it hurts the local officials up and down the list. And so we got to build a bench here. And that's what this is about as well. So I'm hoping that people will take a look at what I've done, what I'm proposing, why it's in their interest that they move in the direction I'm suggesting. And I think that is what we're seeing some response to.
I have a quick COVID question in this regard. The Florida Marlins today announced they had to suspend their season. Be curious, because I know you get briefings on how COVID should be dealt with and how society should be comporting itself in the midst of all this. What do you make of how sports leagues are starting to play again? And frankly, for that matter, what do you make of how schools are considering all this? The president's considering, or has said, he would withhold federal funding from states or school districts that don't reopen, or that don't reopen. I mean, you must have thoughts on all this.
Well, I do. I've laid out, in the interest of time, we'll get you a copy of my school reopening plan, what I think is required in order to do that. There's some circumstances you can do that, but you have to make significant investments to do that in order to provide for protective gear, in order to provide for social distancing, in order to have testing and tracing and all those things. It's possible, but it's a significant investment, and it requires the certainty that teachers as well as students are going to be protected. And where you're in a high intensity area where there's a lot of COVID, it is not a good idea. Evidence the fact that, rhetorical question, I'm not expecting you to answer it. Do you think the president all of a sudden decided not to go to Tallahassee because he thought it was the interest of the public? He decided, Jacksonville, Florida. I was thinking of the capital. To go to Florida, to Jacksonville? Well, because even the Republicans down there said, we don't want you doing this. We don't want you doing this. They're just, it's a mistake. And so I think that there are guidelines that have to be made much more specific by the CDC. They should let the scientists speak. Let the scientists speak. I'm happy the president is back holding his conferences on COVID every day. I don't know what the hell he's adding to it, except it's good he's wearing a mask and saying the right things, mostly. But this is about science. This is about science. This is about expertise. This is about transparency. And we've got to make